Across the galaxy, there exists a single species that every alien civilization whispers about in hushed, terrified tones. They call them the Persistence Hunters, a race so relentless, so impossibly determined, that they will chase their prey across star systems for decades without rest. These creatures don't rely on superior technology or overwhelming firepower. Instead, they possess something far more terrifying: an unbreakable will, and the disturbing ability to never, ever give up. The Galactic Council had heard the stories, of course. Tales of humans running down megafauna on their primitive homeworld for days without stopping. Legends of human soldiers who continued fighting even after sustaining wounds that would kill most species instantly. Myths of human explorers who survived in environments that should have been absolutely lethal, simply because they refused to die. But stories are just stories, until the day the Council made the catastrophic mistake of threatening Earth. What they discovered was that every terrifying legend about human persistence was not only true, it was a gross understatement. And among these relentless hunters, there existed an elite few whose skills were so refined, so perfectly honed, that they had transcended from mere persistence hunters into something else entirely. They were about to learn why, in the darkest corners of the galaxy, even the most vicious predator species had a single universal nightmare: being hunted by a human who has marked you as prey. The hunt was about to begin. Admiral Kethvar had seen many species beg for mercy in his 400 years of service to the Galactic Council's Enforcement Division. The hulking Draknari, with their chitinous armor and razor-sharp claws, would grovel when faced with orbital bombardment. The psychic Mentari, capable of crushing minds with a thought, would weep tears of liquid crystal when their homeworld was threatened. Even the war-loving Brutok, who lived only for battle and conquest, would eventually submit when shown overwhelming force. But humans? Humans were different. The human ambassador sat across from him in the council chamber, completely relaxed despite being surrounded by the most feared military leaders in the galaxy. Ambassador Sarah Chen looked like she was attending a casual business meeting rather than facing an ultimatum that could end her species. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a plain blue suit that looked almost primitive compared to the elaborate ceremonial armor and biotechnological enhancements of the other delegates. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Chen said, her voice carrying a strange quality that made Kethvar's sensory organs twitch with unease. "You're demanding that humanity surrender our territorial claims in the Outer Rim, hand over all our advanced AI research, and submit to having council overseers placed in our government. In exchange, you'll allow us to continue existing." "That is correct," rumbled War Master Thok, the massive Brutok, whose scarred hide told the story of 1,000 battles. "Your species has expanded too rapidly, developed too quickly. The Council has determined that humans pose a potential threat to galactic stability." Chen nodded thoughtfully, as if she was considering a restaurant menu rather than the subjugation of her entire species. "And if we refuse? Then we will demonstrate why over 300 civilizations have submitted to Council authority," Kethvar said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Your military, while impressive for such a young species, cannot hope to stand against the combined might of the Galactic Council. We have ships that can crack planets, weapons that can sterilize solar systems, and warriors bred for nothing but conquest." The human ambassador was quiet for a long moment, and Kethvar found himself studying her face. Most species, when faced with such overwhelming odds, would show some sign of fear or desperation. The Mentari would broadcast their terror psychically. The Draknari would click their claws nervously. The peaceful Solori would begin their death songs. Chen just looked thoughtful. "You know," she finally said, "before I came here, I did some research on the species represented in this room. Fascinating reading. The Brutok, for example. Incredible warriors, but they fight for honor and glory. When they're defeated decisively, they accept it and move on to find new battles. Very practical in its way." Tok's massive head tilted slightly, unsure where this was going. "The Draknari are ambush predators by nature," Chen continued. "Patient, calculating, but once their position is compromised, they retreat to find better hunting grounds. Again, very logical behavior." "Your point, human?" Kethvar demanded. "My point is that every species in this galaxy seems to operate on the same basic principle: cost-benefit analysis. When the cost of fighting becomes too high, when the benefits no longer justify the risk, you stop fighting. You negotiate, you retreat, you find a face-saving way to submit. It's rational, it's civilized." Chen stood up slowly, and something in her movement made every predator instinct in the room suddenly activate. She still looked completely relaxed, but there was something different now. Something that made Kethvar's combat-hardened nervous system start sending warning signals. But you see, that's where you've made a critical error in your assessment of humanity, Chen said, her voice still conversational. We don't operate on cost-benefit analysis when it comes to our survival. We never have. She walked to the chamber's main display screen, which showed a tactical overview of human space. 37 star systems, 48 habitable worlds, and 6 billion human beings. Let me tell you about my species, since you clearly haven't done your homework properly. Humans are persistence hunters. Do you know what that means? When none of the alien delegates responded, Chen continued. On our homeworld, early humans didn't hunt by being stronger or faster than their prey. They hunted by never giving up. A human hunter could track an antelope for days, weeks even, never stopping, never resting, until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. The antelope was faster, more agile, had better senses, but it didn't matter, because humans just don't stop. She turned back to face the council delegates, and now they could all see what had been lurking behind her calm exterior. It wasn't fear or desperation. It was something far more unsettling. A cold, calculating patience that spoke of absolute certainty. Our entire evolutionary history is built around this concept. When the ice ages came, other species went extinct or migrated to warmer climates. Humans adapted and kept going. When supervolcanoes blocked out the sun, other species died. Humans ate bark and grass and survived. When diseases swept across continents, other species were wiped out. Humans developed immunity and kept reproducing. The chamber had gone completely silent. Even Thok, who had never backed down from a fight in his life, found himself unconsciously taking a step backward. You want to know what happened the last time someone tried to exterminate humanity? It was on our own planet, and it was our own species doing it. A madman named Hitler tried to create a master race by killing everyone he deemed inferior. You know what the result was? Every human who could pick up a weapon spent 6 years hunting down his followers and destroying them so completely that their ideology became a curse word. Chen's smile was perfectly pleasant, but it made every survival instinct in the room scream warnings. The point I'm trying to make, gentlemen, is that threatening to wipe out humanity wasn't an ultimatum. It was a mistake, because now you've made yourselves our prey. Admiral Kethvar had commanded fleets that had conquered star systems. He had personally killed 17 enemy champions in single combat. He had faced down charging Brutok berserkers without flinching. But something about the way this small human female was looking at him made his blood run cold. You think your numbers matter? Chen asked. We've been outnumbered before. You think your technology gives you an advantage? We've faced superior technology before. You think your warrior cultures make you dangerous? Every human child learns about our warrior cultures as bedtime stories. She gestured to the tactical display showing human space. Such a tiny portion of the galaxy, barely a footnote compared to the vast territories controlled by council species. See? Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave here today thinking you've intimidated us into submission. You'll give us a deadline, probably 30 standard days, to comply with your demands. You'll position your fleets at the borders of human space, confident that when the deadline passes and we refuse, you'll crush us quickly and move on to your next conquest. The human ambassador warped back to her seat, but she didn't sit down. Instead, she leaned forward, placing her hands on the table and looking directly into Kethvar's eyes. But 30 days from now, when your deadline passes and you move in for what you think will be a quick victory, you're going to learn why every predator species on Earth had the good sense to avoid hunting humans. You're going to discover that you haven't trapped prey. You've awakened something that has been sleeping in the dark spaces between stars, waiting for an excuse to hunt again. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Even the usually boisterous Brutok delegation was completely quiet. And when that happens, Chen said softly, you'll understand why the most terrifying sentence in any human language isn't, "We're going to destroy you," or "We're going to kill you." She straightened up and gathered her materials, preparing to leave. The most terrifying sentence is, "We're coming for you." Because once a human says that, once you become our prey, it doesn't matter how far you run or how well you hide. We will find you. We will chase you to the edge of the galaxy if necessary. And we will never, ever stop until you're either dead or you submit completely. As Chen walked toward the chamber exit, her footsteps echoing in the silence, she paused at the door and turned back one final time. Oh, and Admiral? When you're positioning your fleets to attack our colonies, you might want to consider a question that apparently never occurred to you during your planning sessions. What question? Kethvar found himself asking, despite his better judgment. Chen's smile was warm and friendly, and somehow that made it infinitely more terrifying than any threat could have been.
If humans have only been spacefaring for a few decades, and you've been watching us that entire time,
Where exactly do you think our elite hunters have been learning to track prey in zero gravity? The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy sitting in stunned silence, each of them suddenly wondering if they had just made the worst mistake in galactic history. Admiral Kethvar stared at the closed door for a long moment, then turned to his aide. Send a message to all fleet commanders. I want detailed intelligence reports on human military capabilities, focusing specifically on any special forces or elite units. And he paused, an unfamiliar feeling crawling up his spine. And find out everything we can about human hunting practices. All of them. As the council delegates filed out of the chamber, none of them noticed the small device that Ambassador Chen had left behind, hidden beneath the table. A device that was even now transmitting their every word back to Earth, where a very different kind of council was beginning to plan their own response to the Galactic Council's ultimatum. A response that would soon teach the galaxy why humans had never developed a concept of acceptable losses when it came to protecting their own. Colonel Jack Morrison had been tracking his current prey for 6 days across the frozen wasteland of Kepler. 442b when his communication implant chimed with an emergency recall signal. He crouched motionless behind a crystalline rock formation, watching the heat signature of his target through his visor's thermal display, and considered ignoring the signal entirely. The Draknari war criminal he'd been hunting had murdered 37 human colonists on New Geneva before fleeing to this ice-locked world. At the edge of human space, Morrison had followed him across 3 star systems, through 2 asteroid fields, and into the killing cold of a planet, where the average temperature was 60 degrees below freezing. He was less than 200 meters away from his prey now, close enough to see the alien's carapace glittering with frost as it huddled in what it thought was a secure hiding spot. But the recall signal meant only one thing. Humanity was going to war. Morrison activated his comm with a subvocal whisper. Hunter. 1 to control. Confirm emergency recall. Confirmed, Hunter 1, came the response from Captain Sarah Knox back on the stealth ship Persistence. Priority Alpha. All hunters return to base immediately. Morrison's jaw tightened. In 15 years of service with the Terran Special Activities Division, he had never received a Priority Alpha recall. It meant an existential threat to humanity itself. He looked at his prey again, so close after days of patient stalking. The Draknari had no idea death was crouched just 200 meters away. Morrison could take the shot right now, complete his mission, and then respond to the recall. It would only take a few minutes. But Priority Alpha meant humanity needed its hunters more than he needed personal closure. Morrison shouldered his rifle and began moving back toward his extraction point, his white camouflaged armor making him invisible against the ice and snow. As he moved, he activated his long-range communications array. All hunters, this is Hunter.1. Emergency recall is confirmed. Break off current operations and return to base. Whatever you're doing, wherever you are, drop it and come home. Humanity needs us. The responses started coming in immediately, each one a call sign that made enemy intelligence agencies across the galaxy wake up in cold sweats. Hunter, 7 confirming. Breaking off pursuit of Mentari terrorists on Proxima Station. Hunter, 1, 2, acknowledging. Aborting infiltration of Brutok weapons facility. Hunter, 2, 3 responding. Leaving surveillance post on a Kethvar homeworld. Morrison smiled grimly as he heard that last one. Hunter, 2-3. Was Maria Santos. And if she'd managed to establish surveillance on the homeworld of the species that commanded the Galactic Council's enforcement fleets, then humanity's intelligence network was even more extensive than he'd realized. Within hours, ships were converging on Titan Base, the hidden facility built into Saturn's largest moon that served as headquarters for humanity's most classified military unit. To the outside galaxy, the Terran Special Activities Division didn't exist. There were no official records, no public acknowledgements, no diplomatic protests when their operations occasionally caused accidents that eliminated threats to human interests. But every intelligence agency in the galaxy had a file on them. The Draknari called them Kethma, the patient death. The Brutok knew them as Gulthak, hunters in darkness. The Mentari, with their psychic abilities, had detected their presence across multiple star systems and dubbed them the Untouchables, because their minds were completely shielded from telepathic intrusion. The humans just called them the Hunters. Morrison's stealth craft docked with Titan Base 18 hours after the recall signal, and he was immediately escorted to the briefing room where the other recalled operatives were gathering. As he entered, he counted faces he hadn't seen in years. These weren't soldiers in any conventional sense. They were artists, each one a master of the ancient human craft of stalking and killing prey that didn't want to be found. Hunter 7. Lieutenant Colonel Ana Rodriguez had spent 3 years embedded deep in Mentari space, living among telepods who never suspected that the human trader in their midst was actually gathering intelligence on their military installations. Her ability to compartmentalize her thoughts was so complete that she could hold a casual conversation while simultaneously planning an assassination, and the telepods would sense nothing but surface pleasantries. Hunter 1-2. Major David Kim had infiltrated more heavily defended installations than any operative in human history. Give him 5 minutes alone in any facility, and he could disappear so completely that security teams would search for weeks without finding a trace. He was rumored to have spent 6 months living in the ventilation systems of the Brutok High Command, emerging only to gather intelligence before vanishing again. Hunter 2-3. Captain Maria Santos was perhaps the most feared human in the galaxy, though no alien government knew her real name. She was the ghost that intelligence agencies used to scare their recruits. The story of an operative so skilled that she could spend months or even years living among enemy populations, completely invisible until the moment she struck. And there were others. Hunter 5, who specialized in long-range elimination across interstellar distances. Hunter 9, whose expertise was turning enemy agents into unwitting double operatives. Hunter 1-5, who could track a target's movements weeks after they'd passed through an area. 37 hunters in total, each one representing the absolute pinnacle of human capability in their specialized field. They were the products of centuries of warfare, their skills honed by humanity's long history of conflict. Every technique they used had been perfected in the killing fields of Earth's bloodiest wars, then adapted for the three-dimensional chess game of interstellar espionage and assassination. General Patricia Hayes entered the briefing room, and the quiet conversations immediately stopped. Hayes was a legend even among legends, the architect of humanity's intelligence network, and the only person alive who knew the full extent of what the Hunters had accomplished in the shadows. Ladies and gentlemen. Hayes began without preamble. As of 1600 hours yesterday, the Galactic Council delivered an ultimatum to Earth. We have 30 days to surrender our sovereignty, hand over our advanced research, and submit to alien oversight. If we refuse, they will move to destroy human civilization. The room remained silent, but Morrison could see the subtle changes in his colleagues' postures. They were shifting from relaxed attention to active preparation mode. Weapons were unconsciously checked, equipment was mentally inventoried, and escape routes were automatically catalogued. It was the response of apex predators recognizing a threat to their pack. The Council believes they've done their homework on humanity, Hayes continued. They know about our military capabilities, our ship counts, our defensive installations. What they don't know is that for the past 20 years, you've been their homework assignment. She activated the room's holographic display, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. As Morrison watched, thousands of red dots appeared throughout the display, each one marking a location where human intelligence had been gathered. Every major military installation, every command center, every strategic resource depot belonging to Council species has been surveyed, mapped, and analyzed. We know their fleet movements, their command structures, their tactical doctrines, and their personal habits. We know where their leaders sleep, what they eat for breakfast, and how they prefer to die. The display zoomed in on different sectors, showing the incredible extent of human intelligence gathering. There were surveillance posts hidden in asteroid fields throughout Draknari space. Listening stations had been established in the cosmic dust clouds near Brutok patrol routes. Deep cover operatives had been living among alien populations for so long that some of them had started families and were raising the next generation of intelligence assets. The Council thinks they're dealing with a young, naive species that will fold under pressure, Hayes said. They're about to learn that humans don't fold. We hunt. She gestured to the assembled operatives. You represent 20 years of preparation for this exact scenario. Every mission you've run, every target you've eliminated, every piece of intelligence you've gathered has been building toward this moment. The Galactic Council has just declared war on the most successful predator species in the history of this galaxy. Hunter 2-3 raised her hand. What are our rules of engagement? Hayes' smile was cold and sharp. There are no rules. The Council wants to exterminate humanity. So we're going to teach them what extinction actually looks like. You have 30 days to position yourselves for the opening moves. When their ultimatum expires and their fleets move against our colonies, you will begin systematically destroying their ability to wage war. Morrison felt the familiar sensation of his mind shifting into hunter mode. It was a mental state that humans had been perfecting for hundreds of thousands of years, the calm, patient focus of a predator that had scented prey. Are we talking about military targets only? We're talking about total war, Hayes replied. Military assets, government officials, economic infrastructure, communication networks, anything and everything that supports their war effort becomes a legitimate target. The Council wants to play extinction games? We'll show them how humans have survived every extinction event in our planet's history. She walked to the center of the room, making eye contact with each of the assembled hunters. I want you to understand something. This isn't just about winning a war. This is about sending a message that will echo across the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. When this is over, no species will ever again make the mistake of threatening humanity with extinction. Hunter 1-2 spoke up. What about collateral damage? Civilian populations? You are to avoid unnecessary civilian casualties, Hayes said. But understand that in the enemy's minds, there are no human civilians. They're planning to genocide our entire species, including our children. You will use your judgment, but remember that mercy to the enemy is cruelty to your own people. The briefing continued for another 2 hours, covering operational details, target priorities, and extraction protocols. But Morrison's mind was already shifting into the familiar rhythm of a hunt. He was thinking about Admiral HFY, the Draknari who commanded the Council's enforcement fleets. Morrison had been building a psychological profile of the alien for 3 years, studying his patterns, his preferences, his fears. Soon, very soon, Admiral HFY was going to learn what it felt like to be prey. As the briefing ended and the hunters began filing out to prepare for their missions, Morrison paused at the door. General Hayes was still standing by the holographic display, studying the tactical situation with the intensity of a chess master planning her next move. General, Morrison said quietly, that ultimatum the Council delivered, do you think they realize what they've just done? Hayes looked at him with eyes that had seen humanity fight its way from a single planet to a 48-world civilization. Eyes that had planned operations that changed the course of galactic politics without anyone even knowing humans were involved. Colonel, she said softly, I don't think they have the slightest idea. They see a young species with a small fleet and limited territory. They have no concept of what humans become when someone threatens our children. She gestured to the holographic display, where thousands of red dots showed the extent of human intelligence penetration throughout the galaxy. In 30 days, they're going to learn why every successful predator species on Earth learned to avoid human territories. They're going to discover that we don't just fight wars, we hunt them. And once humans start hunting something, we don't stop until it's either dead or completely broken. Morrison nodded and headed for the door, already planning his approach to the HFY homeworld. Behind him, General Hayes turned back to her tactical display, where she was beginning to coordinate what would soon become known throughout the galaxy as the 30-day hunt. The Council had wanted to play extinction games with humanity. They were about to learn that humans had written the book on survival, and the first chapter was always the same: hunt or be hunted. Admiral HFY stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Talon, watching the tactical display that showed his massive fleet positioned at the edge of human space. 3,000 ships representing the combined military might of 17 species, all focused on a single objective: the complete destruction of humanity. 28 days had passed since the ultimatum was delivered, and there had been no response from Earth, no desperate pleas for negotiation, no offers of compromise, no signs of the panic that should have gripped a species facing extinction. The silence from human space was absolute, and somehow more unnerving than any threat could have been. Status report, HFY ordered, his scales rippling with barely controlled anticipation. All fleet elements report ready, Admiral, his tactical officer responded. Brutok assault groups are in position at jump points Alpha through Delta. Mintari Mind War specialists have established psychic suppression fields around all human colonies. Draknari hunter killer packs are standing by for pursuit operations. HFY nodded with satisfaction. It was a perfectly planned operation, the kind of overwhelming force deployment that had brought 300 species to their knees. In a few hours, when the ultimatum officially expired, his fleet would sweep into human space like a tide of destruction. Within a week, humanity would be nothing but a cautionary tale told to other young species who might consider defying the Council. Sir, the communications officer called out, we're receiving a transmission from the human colony at Tau Ceti. It appears to be some kind of recorded message. Put it through, Kethvar ordered, curious to hear what the human's final words would be. The main screen flickered to life, showing the image of a human female in what appeared to be a simple military uniform. She was sitting at a desk with the blue and green banner of the Terran Federation behind her. When she spoke, her voice was calm and conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. "Greetings, Admiral Kethvar," the human said, and every officer on the bridge froze. She had addressed him by name, despite the fact that his fleet was operating under strict communications blackout. "My name is General Patricia Hayes, commander of the Terran Special Activities Division. I'm recording this message approximately 36 hours before your ultimatum expires, which means that by the time you receive it, certain operations will already be underway." Kethvar felt his blood temperature drop several degrees. How could the humans know his identity? How could they have predicted exactly when and where his fleet would be positioned? "I want to thank you for the 30-day notice," Hayes continued with that same unsettling calm. "It gave us time to make some final preparations. I'm sure you're wondering what a species like humanity could possibly do in 30 days to threaten a fleet of your size. The answer is probably less than you think, and considerably more than you can imagine." The human general stood up and walked to a tactical display that looked remarkably similar to the one on Kethvar's own bridge. When it activated, showing a map of the galaxy, the Admiral's sensory organs went completely rigid with shock. The display showed the positions of every single ship in his fleet, down to individual destroyer squadrons. More than that, it showed the fleet compositions, command structures, and tactical deployments of every major military force in Council space. It was intelligence so complete and detailed that it should have been impossible to gather. You see, Admiral, the thing about humans is that we've always been very good at homework. When we decided to join the galactic community, the first thing we did was study our new neighbors extensively. Hayes gestured to the display, which began showing detailed schematics of Draknari ships, Brutok battle tactics, and Mintari psychic warfare techniques. "We learned your languages, your histories, your military doctrines, and your cultural weak points. We studied how you fight, how you think, and most importantly, how you die. Because that's what humans do when we encounter potential threats. We learn everything about them." The Admiral's communications officer was frantically trying to trace the signal's origin, but the transmission seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. It was as if the humans had somehow infiltrated the entire galactic communication network. "Now, you're probably wondering why I'm telling you this," Hayes said, returning to her seat. "After all, what difference could intelligence gathering make against a fleet of 3,000 ships? The answer is that intelligence without action is just interesting reading. But intelligence combined with properly positioned assets, that becomes something else entirely." She checked her watch, and Kethvar had the sudden terrible certainty that something catastrophic was about to happen. "In approximately 30 seconds, you're going to receive reports from across Council space. Military installations going dark, communication networks failing, supply depots exploding, and high-ranking officials suffering unfortunate accidents. At first you'll think it's just random equipment failures and statistical clusters of unrelated incidents." Hayes looked directly into the camera, and her eyes held the same cold patience that Ambassador Chen had shown in the council chambers. "But then you'll start to notice the pattern. Every failure, every accident, every mysterious explosion will have one thing in common. They will all serve to degrade your ability to wage war against humanity. Because for the past 20 years, while you've been monitoring our ships and counting our colonies, my people have been living among you, watching you, and preparing for exactly this moment." As if triggered by her words, alarm klaxons began sounding throughout Kethvar's flagship. Emergency communications started flooding in from across the fleet, and every report was a variation on the same impossible theme. Critical infrastructure was failing throughout Council space. "Admiral," his tactical officer called out, his voice cracking with stress. "We're receiving emergency transmissions from the Draknari homeworld. 3 major military shipyards have suffered catastrophic explosions. They're reporting total facility loss." Before Kethvar could respond, another officer spoke up. "Sir, the Brutok High Command is reporting that their main communication relay has gone offline. They've lost contact with 40% of their fleet elements. Mentari Central Command reports that their psychic coordination nexus has been compromised," came a third report. "They're experiencing what they describe as aggressive mental static that's preventing telepathic communication." On the main screen, General Hayes continued speaking as if she could see the chaos erupting on his bridge. "What you're experiencing right now is what we call decapitation strikes, simultaneous attacks designed to blind, deafen,
and cripple your war machine before the shooting even starts.
Every critical piece of infrastructure you need to coordinate a fleet this size is either destroyed or compromised. Kethvar's claws were unconsciously extending and retracting as he watched his carefully planned operation falling apart in real time. How many assets did they embed? How long have they been planning this? But that's just the opening move, Hayes said, as if she had heard his question. See, the thing about humans is that we don't just plan for the battle we're fighting today. We plan for the war we might have to fight tomorrow, next year, or next decade. Every asset we placed, every piece of intelligence we gathered, every relationship we built, all of it was preparation for the possibility that someone might make the mistake of threatening our existence. The reports kept coming. Weapons depots destroyed by precisely placed explosives. Command centers losing power at critical moments. Transport networks suffering simultaneous failures across multiple star systems. It was like watching the galaxy's most sophisticated military machine spontaneously disintegrate. "Sir," his intelligence officer said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we're also receiving reports of casualties among senior leadership." Fleet Admiral Thakmore of the 3rd Brutok Assault Group was found dead in his sealed quarters this morning. Admiral Sithrak of the Draknari Deep Strike Force suffered what appeared to be a heart attack during a staff meeting. In both cases, there's no evidence of how anyone could have reached him. General Hayes stood up again, and this time her expression was no longer conversational. It was the look of a predator that had cornered its prey. "You wanted to know where our elite hunters have been learning to track prey in zero gravity? They've been practicing on you. For 20 years, my people have been moving through your space like ghosts, learning your patterns, mapping your defenses, and positioning themselves for this exact moment." She walked closer to the camera, and every being on Kethvar's bridge found themselves unconsciously taking a step backward. Right now, there are human operatives within 1,000 meters of every senior military leader in your fleet. They know where you sleep, what you eat, and which routes you take to the bridge each morning. They've been studying you like specimens in a laboratory, waiting for orders to end your existence. The Admiral's personal security chief activated his communicator. "All units, Code Black security protocol. Sweep all senior officer quarters and establish protective details around all flag officers immediately." Hayes seemed to anticipate even this response. "Of course, you're going to implement enhanced security measures now. Lock down your ships, activate internal scanners, post guards at every door." It's a rational response to learning that human assassins are probably aboard your vessels. But here's the thing about human hunters. We've been perfecting infiltration techniques since before we had written language. She returned to her tactical display, which now showed detailed schematics of various alien ship designs. Take the Draknari flagship Endless Talon, for example. Built around a central command core with multiple redundant life support systems. Very impressive design. Unless you know that, Maintenance Shaft 7 Alpha connects directly to the Admiral's ready room ventilation system, or that the water recycling plant on Deck 12 can be accessed from the cargo bay loading dock. Kethvar's blood went completely cold. Those were classified details about his ship's internal layout. Information that should have been impossible for any outsider to possess. The Bruto Dreadnought Blood Crusher has an interesting quirk in its artificial gravity system that creates a null gravity pocket behind the main computer core. Perfect for someone who needs to remain hidden for extended periods. And the Mentari Mindship Thoughtweaver? Its telepathic shielding actually works against the crew as well as enemies, creating perfect blind spots for anyone who knows where they are. One by one, she described security vulnerabilities in ships throughout his fleet. Details so precise and comprehensive that it was clear human intelligence operatives had spent years studying every vessel in the Council Armada. "My point, Admiral, is that this war was over before it started. You just didn't know it yet." General Hayes returned to her seat, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the finality of a death sentence. "In approximately 6 hours, your ultimatum will officially expire, and you'll give the order to attack human colonies. When you do, you'll discover that your fleet is no longer capable of coordinated offensive operations. Your communications are compromised, your supply lines are cut, and your command structure is either dead or dying." She leaned forward, looking directly into the camera. "But here's the really important part, Admiral. That's when the real war begins, because everything I've just described, those were just opening moves. The actual hunt doesn't start until you fire the first shot." The transmission began to break up, but her final words came through with perfect clarity. "Welcome to Earth's kind of war, Admiral. May whatever gods you pray to have mercy on your souls, because we certainly won't." The screen went black, leaving Kethvar staring at his own reflection in the dark display. Around him, his bridge crew was frantically trying to re-establish contact with fleet elements, assess the damage to their operational capabilities, and coordinate responses to the chaos erupting throughout Council space. But the Admiral barely heard any of it. He was thinking about Ambassador Chen's warning 30 days ago, about humans being persistence hunters who never gave up once they marked something as prey. As another report came in, about a supply convoy that had mysteriously vanished between star systems, Kethvar finally understood what the human ambassador had been trying to tell them. They hadn't declared war on humanity. They had declared themselves prey in a hunt that had been going on for 20 years, and they were only just now realizing that the hunters had been circling them the entire time. The most terrifying part wasn't what the humans had already done. It was the growing certainty that everything they'd experienced so far was just the humans saying hello. Colonel Jack Morrison crouched in the maintenance shaft of the Endless Talon, Admiral Kethvar's flagship, and listened to the chaos erupting throughout the massive vessel. Emergency lights cast red shadows through the narrow space as damage control teams rushed past just meters from his hiding position. He had been living in the ship's infrastructure for 3 days now, moving through ventilation shafts and service corridors like a ghost while the crew frantically searched for intruders they would never find. Through his earpiece, he could hear the controlled pandemonium on the bridge, as reports continued flooding in from across the galaxy. Another military depot destroyed on the Draknari homeworld. A Brutok admiral found dead in his quarters under impossible circumstances. An entire Mentari psychic warfare division going silent after their command ship suffered a mysterious systems failure. Morrison smiled grimly as he checked his equipment. The real war was just beginning. His mission was elegantly simple: eliminate Admiral Kethvar and do it in a way that would send a message to every other military leader in Council space. Not just that humans could kill them, but that they could reach anyone, anywhere, no matter how well protected they thought they were. He'd been studying Kethvar for 3 years, learning everything about the Admiral's habits, preferences, and psychological profile. The Draknari was a creature of rigid routine, following the same patterns day after day with military precision. Every morning at 0600 ship's time, he would wake up, perform his species' traditional claw-sharpening ritual, consume a protein meal in his quarters, and then make his way to the bridge via a specific route that he believed was the most secure path through the ship. What Kethvar didn't know was that Morrison had been using those predictable patterns to map out the perfect assassination scenario. The Admiral's route to the bridge took him through a section of corridor that passed directly over Maintenance Shaft 7 Alpha, where a carefully placed shed charge could breach the deck plating at precisely the right moment. Morrison had everything in position and was preparing to execute the plan when his communication implant chirped with an encrypted message from General Hayes. All hunters, new orders. Target modification in effect immediately. Assassination objectives are changed to capture and interrogation. Repeat, we want them alive. Morrison frowned and activated his subvocal communicator. Hunter, 1 to control. Confirm target modification. Why the change? Hunter, 1, this is control. Came the response from Captain Knox aboard the Persistence. Intelligence analysis indicates that dead martyrs might inspire resistance. Living examples of human capability will be more effective at breaking enemy morale. Morrison considered this for a moment. Assassination was clean and final, but capturing a flag officer from his own flagship in the middle of a war zone? That was a statement that would echo throughout the galaxy. Control, Hunter, 1. Understood. Switching to capture protocol. He began modifying his equipment, replacing lethal charges with non-lethal alternatives. The plan would have to change completely. Instead of eliminating Kethvar, he would take the Admiral alive and extract him from his own ship while surrounded by 3,000 enemy vessels. Morrison had attempted more difficult missions before, but not many. 20 minutes later, Admiral Kethvar was making his routine morning journey to the bridge, flanked by 4 heavily armed guards and preceded by an advanced security team that swept every corridor before his arrival. The Draknari Admiral was taking no chances after learning that human assassins were likely aboard his ship. What his security team didn't know was that Morrison wasn't waiting in the corridor at all. He was in the Admiral's destination. The human operative had spent the previous night carefully infiltrating the bridge, using access codes that Hunter 2-3 had acquired during her surveillance of Draknari military communications. By the time Kethvar and his guards reached the bridge, Morrison was already in position behind the main tactical console, invisible in the shadows and completely undetectable to the ship's internal sensors. Kethvar strode onto the bridge with the confidence of a predator who believed he was in complete control of his environment. His scaled hide gleamed under the bright lights as he took his position at the center of the command platform, reviewing the night's reports from his tactical officers. "Status of the human colonies," he ordered. "Our advanced scouts report that all human settlements appear to be maintaining normal operations," his tactical officer replied. "No signs of evacuation or defensive preparations. It's almost as if they don't realize they're about to be attacked." Kethvar's sensory organs twitched with unease. After General Hayes' transmission and the coordinated attacks throughout Council space, he had expected the human colonies to be in a state of desperate preparation. The fact that they seemed completely unconcerned was somehow more unsettling than panic would have been. "What about our fleet status?" he asked. "Still assessing damage from the infrastructure attacks," came the reluctant response. "We've lost approximately 30% of our communication capability and 40% of our supply line coordination. Engineering estimates it will take at least 6 hours to restore basic operational capability." Morrison listened to this exchange from his hiding place and felt a surge of professional satisfaction. The opening moves of the human response had been even more effective than planned. The Council fleet was effectively blind, deaf, and half-starved before the shooting even started. But now it was time for the real message. Morrison activated a small device that would interfere with the ship's internal communications, then stood up from behind the tactical console with his weapon trained on Admiral Kethvar's back. "Admiral," he said conversationally, "I need you to come with me." The bridge erupted in chaos. Guards spun around, weapons were drawn, and multiple alarm systems activated simultaneously. But Morrison had chosen his moment perfectly. He was positioned so that any shot taken at him would risk hitting the Admiral, and his weapon was aimed at the base of Kethvar's skull, where a single round would be instantly fatal. "Nobody move," Morrison said calmly, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who held all the cards. "Admiral, please dismiss your guards. We need to talk privately." Kethvar slowly turned to face the human, and Morrison could see the moment when the alien realized exactly what was happening. This wasn't a desperate assassination attempt by a cornered enemy. This was a predator who had been patiently waiting in his den while the prey walked directly into the trap. "You're one of them," Kethvar said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The hunters." "Colonel Jack Morrison, Terran Special Activities Division," Morrison replied with a slight nod. "I've been living on your ship for 3 days, Admiral. I know your morning routine, your security protocols, and the fact that you have a habit of reviewing tactical reports while standing in exactly this position." The Draknari Admiral's scales rippled with what Morrison recognized as extreme fear. "How long have you been watching us?" "Long enough," Morrison said. "Now, Admiral, I need you to order your guards to leave the bridge. We're going to take a little trip together." "And if I refuse?" Morrison's smile was perfectly pleasant and utterly terrifying. "Then I kill you right here and extract your second-in-command instead. Your choice." For a long moment, the bridge was completely silent, except for the hum of ship's systems and the distant sound of alarm klaxons echoing through the corridors. Finally, Admiral Kethvar raised his hand to signal his guards. "Stand down," he ordered. "All personnel, clear the bridge immediately." "Sir," his tactical officer protested, "we can't leave you alone with—" "That's an order," Kethvar snapped. "Clear the bridge now." Reluctantly, the bridge crew filed out, leaving Morrison alone with the most senior military commander in Council space. As the doors sealed behind the last guard, Morrison activated another device that would prevent anyone from opening them from the outside. "Very good," Morrison said. "Now we're going to walk to your private shuttle bay. You're going to authorize the launch of your personal craft, and we're going to take a short trip to a neutral location where some people want to have a conversation with you." "What people?" Kethvar asked. "The kind of people who've been planning for this conversation for 20 years, Morrison replied. "Now move." As they left the bridge together, Kethvar walking ahead with Morrison's weapon trained on his back, the Admiral found himself thinking about all the intelligence briefings he'd received about human capabilities. Every report had focused on their ships, their weapons, their conventional military strength. None of them had even mentioned the possibility that humans could simply walk onto his flagship, live there undetected for days, and then calmly kidnap him from his own bridge while surrounded by 3,000 allied vessels. "How?" Kethvar asked as they walked through the corridors of his ship. "How did your intelligence network become so extensive without anyone noticing?" Morrison was silent for a moment, considering how much to reveal. Then he decided that understanding the scope of what they were facing might actually serve the mission better than ignorance. "Admiral," he said quietly, What would you do if you were a young species surrounded by civilizations that were thousands of years more advanced than you were? Focus on rapid development, I suppose. Try to close the technology gap. That's what most species would do, Morrison agreed. But humans have never been most species. We looked at the galactic community and realized that we couldn't compete on technology or raw military power, at least not initially. So we decided to compete on something else entirely. They reached a junction in the corridor, and Morrison guided Kethvar toward the shuttle bays. We realized that the galaxy's older civilizations had a weakness, Morrison continued. They were comfortable. They'd been dominant for so long that they'd forgotten how to be paranoid. They'd forgotten what it was like to be hunted. So you became the hunters, Kethvar said. We became what we've always been, Morrison corrected. We just applied those skills to a larger hunting ground. Every human merchant, every human diplomat, every human tourist who visited your space was gathering intelligence. Not as spies, as hunters learning about their prey. They reached the shuttle bay, and Morrison watched as Kethvar authorized the launch of his personal craft with biometric scanners that confirmed his identity. To anyone monitoring the departure, it would appear that the Admiral was simply taking a routine flight for personal reasons. As the shuttle lifted off from the Endless Talon, Morrison activated the craft's stealth systems and set course for a set of coordinates that would take them to a location where a very different kind of conversation was about to begin. Admiral, Morrison said as they left the flagship behind, you're about to learn something that no other species in galactic history has ever had to face. You're about to discover what happens when humans decide that someone needs to be hunted. Behind them, the massive Council fleet was still struggling to deal with the coordinated attacks that had crippled their operational capability. They didn't yet realize that their Supreme Commander had been taken, and by the time they figured it out, Admiral Kethvar would be sitting across a table from people who had been planning for this conversation since before his fleet had even been assembled. The hunt was no longer coming. It had arrived, and it was about to teach the galaxy what humans meant when they said they never gave up. Admiral Kethvar sat in a simple metal chair in what appeared to be a standard interrogation room aboard an unknown vessel. The walls were bare grey metal. There were no windows, and the only furniture was the table between him and the 3 humans who had been questioning him for the past 6 hours. Despite the basic surroundings, he had never been more terrified in his 400-year life. The humans hadn't tortured him. They hadn't even raised their voices. Instead, they had simply talked to him about his own military operations, his personal history, and his species' strategic capabilities, demonstrating a level of knowledge about Draknari civilization that should have been impossible for any outsider to possess. General Patricia Hayes sat across from him with a tablet displaying information that made Kethvar's scales crawl with horror. She knew about military operations that were classified at the highest levels. She knew the names of his family members, his personal financial accounts, and the location of his private retreat on the Draknari homeworld. More disturbingly, she seemed to know about classified military research projects that even he wasn't supposed to be aware of. I have to admit, Admiral, Hayes said conversationally, your people's approach to orbital bombardment is quite sophisticated. The plasma saturation technique you used to pacify the rebellion on Kepler 438c was particularly impressive. Very thorough. Kethvar felt his blood temperature drop. The Kepler 438c operation had been so classified that only 7 individuals in the entire Draknari military knew the details. The fact that this human was casually discussing it meant that human intelligence penetration was far deeper than anyone had imagined. Of course, Hayes continued, the civilians who were vaporized might have a different opinion about your thoroughness. Approximately 2.3 million non-combatants, if our records are correct. That was a military operation against insurgent forces, Kethvar protested. The civilians were warned to evacuate. 3 hours' notice to evacuate an entire planet, said Colonel Morrison, who was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Very generous. I'm sure the families with young children really appreciated having enough time to pack their belongings and find transport off-world. The Admiral's jaw tightened. This is war. Civilians' casualties are unfortunate but inevitable. An interesting perspective, Hayes said, making a note on her tablet. Because that's exactly the same logic you applied when you issued the ultimatum to humanity. Our civilians, including our children, were to be eliminated because we refused to surrender our sovereignty. She looked up from her tablet and met his eyes directly. The only difference, Admiral, is that we have a much better understanding of how to minimize collateral damage while maximizing strategic impact. Would you like a demonstration? Before Kethvar could respond, The wall screen activated, showing a real-time tactical display of his fleet. What he saw made his sensory organs go rigid with shock. The massive Council armada that had been positioned to destroy human civilization was gone. Not destroyed, simply gone. 3,000 ships had vanished without a trace, leaving empty space where the most powerful military force in galactic history had been assembled.
What did you do? Kethvar whispered. We hunted them, Hayes replied simply.
Every ship, every crew, every piece of military hardware that you brought to exterminate humanity has been captured intact. Your people are alive and unharmed, but they're now guests of the Terran Federation. She gestured to the display, which began showing images of Council military personnel in what appeared to be comfortable detention facilities. No one was killed unnecessarily. No ships were destroyed unless they refused to surrender. No civilian populations were targeted. We simply demonstrated that your entire military force was completely helpless against opponents who had been studying them for 20 years. Morrison stepped forward. Your flagship was the last to be taken. The Bruto dreadnought Blood Crusher surrendered after our operative eliminated their entire command structure non-lethally within a 15-minute window. The Mentari mineship Thoughtweaver was captured when our psychological warfare specialists convinced their telepathic crew that resistance was not only futile but psychologically harmful to themselves. Impossible, Kethvar said, but his voice lacked conviction. After everything he'd witnessed over the past few days, the impossible had become routine. The interesting part, Hayes continued, is that this entire operation was conducted with less than 40 human operatives. 37 hunters against 3,000 ships representing 17 different species. The mathematics alone should have made victory impossible. She activated another display showing a timeline of the operation. But mathematics assumes equal capability, and that's where your intelligence services made their fatal error. You assessed human military strength based on conventional parameters, ship counts, weapon yields, troop numbers. You never considered that humans might approach warfare from a completely different paradigm. The timeline showed the systematic dismantling of the Council fleet, operation by operation. Each engagement was a masterpiece of precise planning and flawless execution, with human operatives exploiting weaknesses that their targets never knew they had. Every species in the galaxy fights the same way, Morrison said. Large fleets, direct confrontation, overwhelming firepower. It's an approach that makes sense when you're dealing with opponents who think like you do. But humans don't think like you do, Hayes added. We think like predators who spent millions of years learning how to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and more numerous than we were. We learned patience, precision, and persistence because anything less meant extinction. She gestured to the display showing the captured fleet. Your ships were taken by opponents who had been living among your crews for months or even years. Your command structures were neutralized by people who knew your officers' daily routines better than their own family members did. Your strategic plans were anticipated because we'd been reading your classified communications since before you'd even formulated them. Admiral Kethvar stared at the images of his captured fleet, trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. The most powerful military force in galactic history had been defeated, not through superior firepower, but through superior knowledge and patience. What do you want? He finally asked. General Hayes leaned back in her chair. Admiral, what we want is very simple. We want the galaxy to understand that threatening humanity with extinction is a mistake that will never be repeated. She activated a new display showing star maps of Council space. Right now, every major military installation, government center, and strategic resource in Council territory is under surveillance by human operatives. We know where your leaders live, where your children go to school, and where your most critical infrastructure is located. The map showed thousands of red dots throughout Council space, each one representing a potential target that could be eliminated at any time. The difference between us and you, Hayes continued, is that we have no interest in ruling over other species or expanding our territory through conquest. We just want to be left alone to develop our civilization in peace. Morrison spoke up. But if anyone ever again makes the mistake of threatening human survival, they'll discover that we've been preparing for that possibility since the day we made contact with galactic civilization. Hayes stood up and walked to the wall screen, which now showed images of human colonies throughout the galaxy. Peaceful settlements where families were raising children, scientists were conducting research, and artists were creating new forms of beauty. This is what you tried to destroy, Admiral. These are the people you planned to exterminate because they refused to surrender their freedom to alien authority. Dale. She turned back to face Kethvar. In approximately 6 hours, you're going to be returned to your flagship along with complete records of this operation. You're going to report back to the Galactic Council and explain exactly what happened here. And you're going to recommend that they issue a formal apology to humanity and establish new protocols for dealing with species that prefer independence to submission. And if the Council refuses? Hayes' smile was warm and friendly, and somehow that made it more terrifying than any threat could have been. Admiral, the Council can choose to accept that humans are not a species to be conquered, or they can continue believing that overwhelming force is the answer to every problem. But they should understand that we've now demonstrated our ability to neutralize any military threat they can assemble. She gestured to the tactical display showing the captured fleet. Every ship, every weapon, every strategic asset they used against us is now under human control. We could return them intact as a gesture of goodwill, or we could dismantle them and use the technology to enhance our own defensive capabilities. The choice is entirely up to the Council. Morrison added, they should also understand that this operation represents a very small fraction of human capability. If we wanted to conduct offensive operations against Council space, they would wake up tomorrow to discover that their entire civilization had simply stopped functioning. Admiral Kethvar looked at the two humans who had just demonstrated that everything he thought he knew about warfare was obsolete. The calm confidence in their voices made it clear that they weren't making threats. They were simply describing options that were available to them. Why didn't you just destroy us? He asked quietly. You clearly had the capability. General Hayes was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Because, Admiral, humans have never been interested in becoming the galaxy's dominant predator. We've seen what that kind of power does to species over time. It makes them comfortable, complacent, and eventually vulnerable to the next challenger that comes along. She returned to her seat. What we want is to be the galaxy's reminder that there are always consequences for those who choose conquest over cooperation. We want every species to understand that somewhere in the dark spaces between stars, humans are watching and waiting.
Waiting for what? For someone to make the mistake of threatening our children again? Morrison said simply.
Because when that happens, the next demonstration won't be nearly as gentle as this one was. 6 hours later, Admiral Kethvar was returned to his flagship along with his entire captured fleet. The operation had been so precisely executed that most of his crew didn't even realize they'd been captured and released. To them, it appeared that the Admiral had simply taken a brief diplomatic meeting and returned to resume normal operations. But Kethvar carried with him a message that would reshape galactic politics for the next 1,000 years. Humanity was not a young species to be conquered or controlled. They were apex predators who had been patiently studying every potential threat in the galaxy while disguising their true capabilities behind a facade of peaceful exploration and trade. Within a week, the Galactic Council issued a formal apology to humanity and established new diplomatic protocols that recognized human sovereignty over their territory. The ultimatum was rescinded, and several council members privately requested meetings to discuss mutual security arrangements with the Terran Federation. But more importantly, a new understanding spread throughout the galaxy. In taverns and military academies, in government chambers and private conversations, the same message was whispered in hundreds of different languages. Never threaten a human's family. Because if you do, you'll discover that humanity has been preparing for that mistake since before they learned to build starships. And once humans mark you as prey, they will hunt you across the galaxy with patience that makes glaciers seem hurried and determination that makes mountains seem fragile. The galaxy had learned why, in the darkest nightmares of every predator species that had ever existed, there was always the same terrifying image. Being stalked by something that would never stop, never give up, and never show mercy to those who threatened the innocent. Humanity had taken their place as the galaxy's apex predators, not through conquest, but by demonstrating that they were far too dangerous to ever be conquered themselves.